Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Darrell. Starting with singing number 13, Wonderful Words of Life. Number 13. Sing them over again to me, wonderful words of life. Let me, Lord, their beauty see, wonderful words of life. Words of life and beauty, teach me faith and duty. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Christ gives to all wonderful words of life. Sinnerless to the loving call, wonderful words of life. Also freely given, wooing us to heaven. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Sweetly echo the gospel call, wonderful words of life. Offer pardon and peace to all, wonderful words of life. Jesus, only Savior, sanctify forever. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Number 43, more about Jesus. Sing 1, 2, and 4. More about Jesus would I know, more of His grace to others show, more of His saving fullness see, more of His love who died for me. More about Jesus, more about Jesus, more of His saving fullness see, more of His love who died for me. More about Jesus let me learn, more of His holy will discern. Spirit of God, my teacher be, showing the things of Christ to me. More about Jesus, more about Jesus, more of His saving fullness see, more of His love who died for me. More about Jesus on His throne, riches and glory all His own. More of His kingdom sure increase, more of His coming Prince of Peace. More about Jesus, more about Jesus, more of His saving fullness see, more of His love who died for me. Might have a word of prayer now. Leroy, would you lead us a word of prayer, please?
Our Father in heaven, I want to thank you for this day, and each and every one has assembled here to sing hymns of praise to you and hear more of your word. I ask you to be with Wade as he brings forth, and I ask you to be with us as we absorb. I ask you to go with the ones that are not here today, and I ask you to be with the sick and afflicted, and I ask you to comfort them if it be your will. I ask you to forgive us where we fail you, in the blessed name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Mark number 361. 361. Stay away.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Well, after a couple of difficult stories to teach, I've got a little easier one to teach this evening. I don't think the stories of Jephthah and Samson are difficult to understand, just sometimes it's difficult to find some good things to say about what happens in those stories. Sorry, I'm having to delay just a little bit. My iPad's looking for the presentation here, so I'm going to kill a little bit of time because I can't do anything until it finds it. So
This was not on. Do you have any
I
idea
don't know what's going on. Yeah, Logan, one of the TVs isn't on up here. Yeah, I don't think that's got anything to do with what's happening here. I may just need to redo my connection here. Yeah, it's counting its fingers and toes. Don't you love technology? It's great when it works, and then when it doesn't, not so much. That's the way it goes. But last week we talked about Samson, and Samson, of course, was born in a miraculous way. His parents were blessed with this child. The angel of the Lord announces his arrival, and the angel of the Lord also wants his parents to raise Samson in a very specific way. He was to take the vow of the Nazarite really from birth. Although, as the story unfolds, one of the prohibitions with the vow of the Nazarite is you're not supposed to touch a dead body. But there's a lot of dead bodies in the story of Samson, which can't really square that one up. But anyways, Samson was God's instrument to provoke a confrontation, if you will, between Judah and the Philistines, and he seems to have accomplished that. Of course, he dies in a very horrific way. There at the end, he's blinded and he's chained up, and he pushes the pillars of the temple off to the side and brings the whole building down, loses his own life in the process. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do about this presentation because it's telling me that me and the Mac are not on the same network, which isn't true. So I don't know, Logan, if there's any magic you can do back there, but we'll just kind of have to proceed ahead with what I've got here, and maybe one of these. Oh, perfect. Yeah, we'll just use that other one. Change one out for the other. Perfect. Thank you so much, Logan. Tell you what, I don't know what we'd do without Logan. Yeah, doing really good work for us. So, all right, here we go. We're going to get into.
Wait, I have.
Yeah, go ahead, Darrell.
Doesn't the New Testament tell us not to make vows, or what does it say about vows in the New Testament? I'm trying to find that.
Yes, it does, but that prohibition was not under those under the old covenant. So
I wonder what changed. I guess that was my question.
Well, Jesus says, "Do not swear
But
by the temple. Let your yes be yes and your no no."
Yeah.
I don't know what changed there. I guess I hadn't really thought about that too much. There is a change. There is a shift there of some sort, and it probably just comes down to. Well, Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes warns people about the vows that you make. And it just may be that it's better for us not to make vows that we can't guarantee we can keep. And that's actually one of the things that Solomon warns about. It's like, if you make this promise, God's listening and you don't keep it, and that's a big deal. I don't know, I mean, Paul did take a vow. In the 21st chapter of Acts, it says that he had his hair cut at Cenchrea for he had taken a vow. It kind of looks like Paul may have taken the Nazarite vow for a time period. We don't know any of the context behind that. We just know that he took a vow, he had his hair cut. It sounds like he took a Nazarite vow, which makes you wonder, did that violate what Jesus said? And I don't think it did. I know some people, when they go to court, some Christians, rather than swearing to tell the truth, they will affirm because they have a conscience about what Jesus says.
Wasn't there some men took a vow to kill Paul?
Yeah, but those were Jews.
Yeah, those were Jews.
Yeah, those were Jews that wanted Paul dead.
Yeah.
That was a little bit later in the book of Acts. That's why they had to move Paul to Caesarea.
I guess what I was trying to think through that was whether that was something that God wanted back in the Old Testament, that was a practice that they did. And, I mean, you know, of course, I guess he did kind of direct how Samson be raised, that. So, it's not important. I just kind of wondered what the difference was there.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't given it a whole lot of thought as to why the change was made. I guess I just only thought that the change was made. But by the same token, I mean, when we marry, we say vows, and we promise to do various things for our marriage partner. So, is that a violation of what Jesus taught? I'm not sure. So, I don't know. I guess I just don't know. Any other questions? Let's move back through. Well, we've already kind of talked about this. Yep. Okay. So we're going to talk about Ruth tonight, and I thought it might be good to get just a little bit of background information before we get into the book of Ruth. And some of this is going to be the family tree, so to speak. Backtracking, to the book of Numbers, chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. I don't have all 7 verses here. I just kind of pulled the main ideas that I want to highlight from this passage. The Lord speaks to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of meeting on the first day, the 2nd month, in the 2nd year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, "Take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel by their families, by their fathers' houses. And with you there shall be a man from every tribe, each one the head of his father's house. From Judah, Nahshon, the son of Amminadab." All right, so this is, they're a year out from the land of Egypt. They are preparing to go to the land of Canaan for the first time. And God tells Moses to take a census. Each tribe is to select a leader. And the leader that's chosen for the tribe of Judah is a man by the name of Nahshon. Nahshon was the head of the tribe of Judah. That's significant because of the family tree. In 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verses 10 and 11, Ram begat Amminadab, and Amminadab begot Nahshon, leader of the children of Judah. Nahshon begot Salma, and Salma begot Boaz. And how does Boaz factor into our story tonight? Well, Boaz is the man who ends up marrying Ruth, falls in love and ends up marrying Ruth at the end of the book. So the reason I bring this up is that Boaz is a descendant of the leader of the tribe of Judah during the wandering in the wilderness. So they don't have like a royal house or a kingly line, so to speak, but in a sense, this gives you at least some sort of frame of reference as to why Boaz was likely a wealthy landowner. He was a descendant of the leader of the children of Judah during this time. Now, I want to point out this name Salma here, S-A-L-M-A. Salma and Salmon are the same man. They're used interchangeably. So Nahshon gives birth to Salma, so he must have been born either before the Exodus or during the wandering. Okay? And Salma, this makes Boaz the grandson of Nahshon, head of the tribe of Judah. So what am I driving at here? Well, I'm trying to get kind of a sense of where the book of Ruth happens. And it looks like to me, if the chronology we have is complete, and I will kind of hedge just a little bit, it does appear that some of the chronology, some of the family trees, I should say, in the Old Testament are incomplete. But kind of piecing all of this together, it kind of seems like Boaz was probably born in the first generation after they settled the land of Canaan. So Joshua takes the children of Israel into the land of Canaan. Salma or Salmon is his father. Salmon is there for the conquering of the land of Canaan. Then Boaz is born probably in that first generation after they settled in the land of Canaan. We know that Boaz was an older man when he met Ruth. In fact, when Ruth basically proposes to him, Boaz is flattered by Ruth's proposal and said, hey, you could have gone after some wealthier, younger man, but you chose me instead. So Boaz is an older man, and it just kind of looks to me like if you piece this chronology together, the book of Ruth probably happens pretty early in the era of the Judges. So even though it's after the book of Judges, chronologically it happens much earlier. And it's a little difficult to pin down when exactly it took place. I kind of lean toward sometime in the book of Judges chapter 3, probably during the time of Othniel. That's my best guess. Othniel was the first judge. He was the nephew of Caleb, the Caleb who, with Joshua, insisted that they invade the land of Canaan the first time. Caleb had a nephew, Othniel. Othniel is the first listed judge in the book of Judges. And I kind of think, and this is just a notion, so don't take this as scripture. I had this notion that it was probably in this time, in the third chapter of Judges, when the book of Ruth happened. So that's my best guess. I can't be absolutely sure. Tammy, is that a hand?
No.
Oh, I was so excited there. Oh, yeah. One of these days, you'll comment again. All right. So a little bit more just about the book of Ruth in general. This is something we talked about a few weeks ago. As best as we can tell, and again, we can't be absolutely sure about these things, but these are educated guesses. There's a lot of Jewish tradition that backs this up as well. The Jews believe that Samuel was likely the editor of Joshua. He's the one who compiled the book of Judges. He probably wrote the book of Ruth and probably wrote most of what we call 1 Samuel. Of course, he dies in 1 Samuel chapter 25, so he doesn't complete that book. It was probably completed by maybe Nathan, who was the prophet during David's reign as king. That's a good candidate. So the book of Ruth was probably written by Samuel, and sometimes in the Hebrew Old Testament, the books of Judges and Ruth are put together as one single volume. They're not two separate books. So if you ever open up a Hebrew Bible and you wonder, why are Judges and Ruth together? Well, they're happening in the same time period, right? And the Jews believe they were written by the same person, and so they just combined those two books and put them together. By the way, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles are single volumes in the Hebrew Old Testament as well. All right. So the purpose of the book of Ruth seems to be to link David back to Nashon, who's the head of the tribe of Judah. So you kind of have this descent from Nashon, who was the leader of the tribe of Judah. But it's also to explain why David has a Moabite in his family tree, because that's kind of a big deal. It's a big deal because of something that Moses says in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 3 and 4. An Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. None of his descendants shall enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread and water on the road when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam the son of Beor from Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse you. So in this passage, God makes it very clear, because the Moabites mistreated the children of Israel. Remember, the Moabites are the ones who conspired with Balaam to send in their women to seduce the Israelites and to lead them into the worship of Baal. And for that reason, God says, no Moabite shall be a part of my congregation. No Moabite shall be a part of my assembly. So it seems like the book of Ruth was probably written, at least one purpose for it, was to explain why David had in his family tree a Moabite woman. And this seems to be the backstory, so to speak. Any questions or comments? That's just kind of a little bit of a, kind of putting the book of Ruth in where it belongs in the Old Testament. Anybody got anything they want to say? Keep moving? All right, let's get on to chapter 1. We're not going to read every verse of every chapter. We'll probably just pick and choose like we have with other books. But we'll go ahead and read the first 6 verses. Now it came to pass in the day when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to the country of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, and her 2 sons. Now they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. So the woman survived her 2 sons and her husband. All right, so you know me, I love my maps. So let's get a sense of where we're at here in the world. Okay, so we start over here in Bethlehem. And the best way to get to Moab is to go north of the Dead Sea and then head down this road here to the south. And here's the land of Moab over on the eastern part, the southeastern part of the Dead Sea. So this is where Elimelech takes his family during a time of famine. There's famine in the nation of Israel. That tells us something about what's going on in Israel. We'll get into that here in a moment. Okay. So Elimelech and Naomi are the original couple. They live in Bethlehem, and Bethlehem is, the name means house of bread. That'll come back to have some significance here in just a moment. Bethlehem is the house of bread, but what's happening at the beginning of our story? Well, there's a famine. And as we're going to look over in Deuteronomy chapter 11 here in just a moment, if there's a famine in the land of Israel, that means the people of Israel are being unfaithful to God. Famine was one of the punishments for unfaithfulness. So that gives us a sense that at the beginning of the book of Ruth, things aren't what they should be in the land of Judah, in the land of Israel. Elimelech and Naomi leave Bethlehem thinking that they're getting away from trouble, but what ends up happening? Well, trouble follows them, right? And that's the way life works. Sometimes we think we can get away from trouble by going away, right? Fresh start, clean slate. And there is some truth to that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not denying the truthfulness of that idea. But it does seem that if trouble isn't resolved before, it's not going to be resolved later. It's like the story that Darla always tells about the guy who moves to a new neighborhood and he asks his new neighbor, well, what are the neighbors like around here? And the guy says, well, probably like the ones in your neighborhood before. You know, it's just some people think that they're leaving their troubles behind, but they end up just taking them with them, right? That's not exactly what happens here to Elimelech and Naomi, but it does seem that this is teaching us a principle that sometimes running away from trouble doesn't actually get us away from trouble. So they escaped from famine in Israel, but what did they find in the land of Moab? Well, they found death. So they didn't find what they were looking for in Moab. Makes me think of that U2 song, but I won't sing it for you. Right? They thought they were going to find sanctuary and plenty in Moab, but they only found death. And the reason why I think there's probably trouble happening in Israel, as I mentioned a moment ago, is because of Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 16 and 17. And there are several passages in the Old Law that indicate when the whole nation was facing things like famine, this was an indication that the nation was being unfaithful. Here's what Moses says: "Take heed to yourselves, lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them, lest the Lord's anger be aroused against you, and he shut up the heavens so that there be no rain, and the land yield no produce, and you perish quickly from the good land which the Lord is giving you." So it seems to me that the book of Ruth it begins in one of those periods of Israel's unfaithfulness. And in fact, if you want to take the time to do so, I did a little bit of rabbit chasing a couple of days ago when I put this lesson together, but it kind of does line up nicely with the time of Othniel, because there's some unfaithfulness that begins, and you just have to wonder, was there a famine in response to that? Then there's an invading army that comes in the time of Othniel, and Israel is put under subjection for about 8 years. And how long are Elimelech and Naomi? Well, at least how long is Naomi in Moab? Well, a period of about 10 years. And then she ends up hearing that things are better back in Judah, so that she goes back there. So, I don't know. That may be just me finding things working out a little too well and thinking, well, this has got to be it. But it does seem to me, there does seem to be some, that does seem to be a possibility at least. So I'll throw that out there. Any questions or comments? We good so far? Keep moving? All right. So verse number 6. And I talked about this a few months ago on Mother's Day. This is always just a very moving passage to read, and you just can't help but walk away from this book with just admiration for the good people in this book. There's just a lot of good people. You got Naomi, you got Ruth, and you got Boaz. Just some really, really good people. All right, anyways. Then this is Naomi, she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. So the famine has ended. Therefore she went out from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each to his mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband." So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. All right, so Naomi wants to go back to Bethlehem. Bethlehem, remember, is the house of bread. And what does Naomi, how does she describe, or how is the condition of Bethlehem described? Well, God had visited his people by giving them what? By giving them bread. So that's one of those little nuances in the text that sometimes can escape our notice because we're not always aware of the meaning of these names. But a lot of these names have meanings in this story, right? Naomi means pleasant, but how has her life turned out? Well, it's turned out to be kind of bitter, right? Until later on it becomes quite pleasant. Anyways, so the conclusion of the famine represents a period of faithfulness. So what it sounds like to me is Israel was unfaithful at the beginning of the story. God has punished them. They've been restored to God, and things are now better. There's bread in Israel. So what's so admirable about this paragraph is Naomi's sacrificial love for her daughters-in-law. She really has very few prospects at this point in her life. Her best hope would be for one of her daughters-in-law to marry her son, and this would continue on the family line. But as she acknowledges in the story, that's just not physically possible at this point, right? She's an older woman. It would take, however long it would take to produce a son. And by that time, you've also got, 20 years that have also passed for both Ruth and Orpah. So it just is not going to work out for Naomi. So what does she do? She lays down what's in her best interest. She sacrifices of herself. She urges her daughters-in-law to do what's best for themselves. Go find husbands. I will go back to Bethlehem by myself. All right. So they're here in Moab, and I just want to talk a little bit about Moab. Remember, Moab The beginning of that nation is, it's sort of notorious, right? Moab started by through a relationship that should have never happened. Remember when Lot and his 2 daughters left Sodom and Gomorrah? His 2 daughters got it in their mind that they'd better have children by their father lest their family line cease, and that's what they did. And Moab was the child conceived by Lot's older daughter in her liaison with her father. So this isn't a very good beginning for the nation. Remember, as we talked about a moment ago, Moab was the nation that worked with Balaam to corrupt Israel, and they refused to allow Israel to pass through on their way to Canaan the second time. So it wasn't just that they attempted to undermine the nation of Israel, they also were inhospitable to Israel as well. And it just so happens that they subjugated Israel in Judges chapter 3, verses 12 through 30, which is the story right after Othniel. So Othniel is the first judge. The second judge is Ehud, and Ehud is the one who goes in to assassinate Eglon, the king of Moab. So maybe that kind of connects everything together. I don't know. But Moab is not a friendly nation to Israel for all the reasons stated here. So why did Elimelech take his family to Moab? That's one of the great questions. It seems like that was probably a foolish move on Elimelech's part. And, we don't want to read too much into that. I don't know that him dying in Moab was some sort of punishment for his foolish decision, but maybe you could take away that implication. Anyways, the daughters-in-law, one of them listens to Naomi, the other one, Ruth, does not. And I just include the King James here because, the King James is just absolutely beautiful in some passages. I mean, the English is just, it's just stunning stuff. I don't use it because we don't speak this sort of English any longer, but you just can't help but admire the poetry of the King James. So I copied this quote from the King James. And Ruth said to Naomi, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me." Man, those guys could really write back then. Those translators were just, and that, the King James is a good translation. But what I really admire about it is those translators really seem to, they really seem to push themselves to make it beautiful. And that's the part that I think is so admirable about that translation. They had a real reverence for the scriptures, and they wanted it to just be beautiful, and I really appreciate that about them. You don't get that sense with our more modern translations. It doesn't seem to be quite as poetic, but anyways. So as we look at that statement or think about that statement from Ruth, what Ruth is essentially doing here is she's making a confession of sorts. You might call this Ruth's conversion to Judaism. She's basically told Naomi, "I'll go wherever you go. I will live wherever you live. I will be a part of your people, and I will die the same place you die." I mean, that's her way of basically saying, I'm a Jew. I am forsaking my Moabite heritage, and I am making myself a part of your people. She's pledging to live as an Israelite. And if you think back to one of the purposes of the book of Ruth, remember, it seems to have been written to help people understand why David has in his history, in his family history, this Moabite woman. So this confession would have been important to help validate that King David was a legitimate king, that there is no problem with a Moabite being in his history. She became a part of the Jewish nation with this pledge. So that seems to be what's happening and how we should interpret that. And what's really interesting about this first chapter of Ruth is Naomi, in a way, is kind of almost the prodigal daughter. So we know the parable of the prodigal son, right, from the New Testament. Well, in a way, Naomi's kind of the prodigal daughter in all this. And there's some parallels here. How does the prodigal son leave? He leaves home full, right? He's given his inheritance. How does Naomi leave? Well, she leaves Israel. She leaves Judah, Bethlehem, with her hands full, so to speak, right? She has her husband. She's got her 2 sons. They end up finding wives in Moab. She has it all. But then, what happens? She encounters trouble, just like the prodigal son eventually ran out of money and got himself into a world of problems. So too Naomi runs into a world of problems in Moab. She basically loses everything. So she returns home to Bethlehem empty-handed. She left full, she returns home empty-handed, just like the prodigal son returned back to his father. He had nothing when he returned back. His father had given him all of his riches, and he had wasted it and he wasted it living in a bad way. I'm not going to get that word out of my mouth tonight. Anyways, when he came back, he came home with his hands empty, and that's how Naomi returned. So there's a bit of a parallel here. And of course, as I mentioned a moment ago, Naomi's name means pleasant, but she tells the people in Bethlehem, don't call me pleasant anymore, instead call me Mara, call me bitter. And we've actually run into this name Mara before. Okay, it's time for double jeopardy. Anybody want to see if you can recall in the recesses of your mind where we've seen the name Mara or bitter before? Do you remember the bitter waters? Yeah. Moses changes, all the water they found was bitter, so they named that land Mara, right? Bitter. I'm not suggesting that there's any sort of connection between those two, but we just run across that name before. All right. They arrive at the beginning of the harvest, which just interestingly, the beginning of the harvest happens to be the Feast of Ingathering, what's called the Feast of Pentecost in the New Testament. This was the feast that celebrated the beginning of the harvest. So the first cuttings of the harvest were taken to the tabernacle to be offered, and this is what inaugurated the harvest season. So they celebrated the harvest at the beginning, and they celebrate the harvest at the end with the Feast of Tabernacles. Excuse me. Any questions or comments? We good to keep moving? We're going to move a little faster than the next 3 chapters. We spent a lot of time in chapter 1, but we're going to move a little quicker. But I just want to give a little bit of background here. Back in the Old Law, in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 19 through 22, God says, when you're harvesting your field, and you forget a sheep in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not glean it afterward. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, therefore I command you to do this thing. So if Israel followed the law, one of the provisions in the law is when you're out harvesting, wherever you're harvesting, if it's a fruit tree, if it's a grapevine, if it's wheat in the field, whatever it is, don't pick it bare. Something falls on the ground, leave it on the ground. Don't harvest the corners of the field. Leave it for the fatherless, for the widow, for the stranger. So this was Israel's way of looking after the vulnerable and the weak among them. And God made provision for them. And notice that the ideal upon which this is built is this remembrance of who they were when they were in Egypt. They didn't glean their fields completely. They didn't harvest them bare because they were to remember. They were slaves in Egypt at one time. They were, if you will, guests in another country. They were dependent upon others. And so this was to be a reminder of the place they were in previous time. And that's what we see happening in the second chapter of Ruth. Ruth goes to the field of Boaz, this wealthy landowner. Boaz was a relative of Elimelech. We don't know how Elimelech was tied in with the descendants of Nahshon. There's no connective tissue between them that's given in Scripture, at least. But Boaz was related in some way to Elimelech. And as you might recall, Boaz notices Ruth. And he seeks to protect her integrity and her honor. And again, this is just one of those moments in the book where we just sit here and think, man, what a good guy. He sees this young woman. I imagine she's probably easy on the eyes, but he treats her in an honorable way. He wants her to stay with the women. He does not want his reapers to give her any problems. He wants to be sure that she walks away from his field with plenty. And Boaz ends up learning Ruth's story, and Ruth's devotion to Naomi really impresses Boaz. He's just quite moved with her story. In fact, the scripture goes on to say in verse 11, this is Boaz talking to Ruth, "It has been fully reported to me all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you have left your father and your mother in the land of your birth, and have come to a people whom you did not know before. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." So Ruth's reputation preceded her. Boaz finds out her story, and he says to Ruth, what you have done for your mother-in-law is a wonderful thing, and I want to support that. I want to honor that. And what a good guy. But I'd like you to key in on that last statement there. The Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Boaz was acknowledging in that statement that Ruth had become a part of the community of Bethlehem. So Boaz was acknowledging, hey, you're a part of us now. You're a part of our community. You have come here to find refuge from God, and we welcome you as a part of our community. So you have Ruth's confession in chapter 1. Then you have Boaz basically saying, we consider you a part of us. You have found refuge under the wings of the Lord God. Well, the next few verses 13 through 23, we see Boaz continuing to look after Ruth. And Naomi ends up finding out that Ruth has been gleaning over in the fields of Boaz. And Naomi sees this as a blessing from God. So she advises Ruth to follow the instructions of Boaz very closely. She tells her to remain close to the women and do exactly as Boaz has told her. And it kind of seems like Naomi's thinking in the back of her mind, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if the two of these people got together? Wouldn't that be nice? Because remember, Boaz is related to Elimelech. So according to the laws governing inheritances, Boaz would have a claim to the inheritance of Elimelech. So Naomi's probably thinking in her mind, what a wonderful arrangement this might be if it all works out. And in fact, Naomi decides, let me see if I can work it out, right? She tries to, well, she doesn't try. She advises Ruth to be very bold with these next few steps. Anything else about chapter 2? Does anybody mind if I take one of these cough drops up here? I am really parched this evening. So it's been a hot couple of days, hasn't it? Wow. Yeah, it's looking beautiful tomorrow and next week. Just in time for the fair. Go ahead, Darl. No. This will be fine.
You don't want anyone?
No, thank you, Karen. No, this will be fine. Thank you. Let's get into chapter 3. So we have a bold move on Ruth's part in chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. Naomi advises Ruth to pursue Boaz, but in a very discreet way, right? So Naomi's just pretty shrewd. Ruth gets herself all gussied up, and after Boaz falls asleep, she goes down to lay down at his feet. So she looks after him. And of course, he, like any of the rest of us, is startled when he wakes up to find a woman asleep at his feet. That really throws him off. And of course, his reaction in verse 9 is, "Who are you?" So Ruth answers, "I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative." Did you catch that? What does that sound like? What did Boaz say in chapter 2? You come here to take refuge under the Lord's wing. And what does Ruth ask of Boaz? Take me under your wing, for you are a close relative. This is basically Ruth proposing marriage to Boaz. Then he said, "Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, in that you did not go after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request. For all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. Now it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good. Let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning." All right. So Ruth proposes to Boaz, "Take your maidservant under your wing." And as I mentioned a little bit ago, Boaz is really flattered by this because she could have chosen a younger, wealthy man to marry. But instead, she chose Boaz. Now, there's one hang-up to this whole arrangement. Remember, Ruth's proposal is, "Take me under your wing, for you are a close relative." What Ruth understands is Boaz has a claim to Elimelech's inheritance. So if he marries Ruth, then the family's inheritance is brought back into to where it belonged. But there's one hang-up. There's another man who's actually a little bit more closely related to Elimelech. So this has to be dealt with. He's got the first claim to Elimelech's inheritance, and by extension, he has the first claim to marry Ruth. This is all tradition that's sorted out under the old law. But Boaz says, "I will do what you've asked. I will go clear this up with this man, but I want you to remain here." And he protects her virtue here with this move. He protects her virtue and her reputation. She stays the rest of the evening, presumably down there at his feet, but he wakes her up very early in the morning and sends her on her way. He doesn't send her home empty-handed. He sends her home with more barley. He's very generous with what he gives her. Think about this. She's going home very early in the morning. If she went home empty-handed, what might people think? Well, where's she been? What's she been up to? But she goes home with this 6 ephahs of barley. Probably wasn't 6 ephahs. That would have been too much to carry. But he sends her home with barley. And that gives the appearance that Ruth has been out working early, so to speak, right? So he's protecting her virtue. When Ruth tells Naomi what has transpired, Naomi says, "Oh, Boaz is going to move fast. This man's going to move quickly," and quickly he does move. All right. Before we get to chapter 4, any questions or comments? Oh, I almost saw it. Hand from Tammy again. I was so hopeful. It's like going to an auction, Tammy. Don't scratch your nose or anything, right? I remember the first time we went to an auction with Darrell. My nose itched the whole time. I don't know how many cows I bid on that day, but my nose just couldn't stop itching. I know we're always going to take home. I was just trying to avoid eye contact with the auctioneer. I was like this. Oh my. All right. Exodus chapter 18. I'm bringing this passage up because we get a little bit of an insight into the inner workings of village life in Israel before the kings come along. So remember back in Exodus 18, this is where Moses is advised by his father-in-law to appoint judges to handle the smaller matters, the lesser matters. Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. And let them judge the people at all times. And it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they shall themselves judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. Well, this tradition continues on whenever the children of Israel settle in the land of Canaan. Every village has a body of what we might call elders. Older, respected men who would sit at the gate of the city, and if there was a problem that needed to be sorted out, they would be the ones who would mediate that problem. Now, just like in Moses' instructions in Exodus 18, really Jethro's instructions, there might be matters that were too difficult to be decided. So in those cases, they could appeal to the priest. And Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 8 through 11 talks about how they could appeal their case to the high priest, and whatever he decided basically was the decision. It could not be disputed, it could not be rejected, it had to be accepted, whatever he decided. And it's a little bit like what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. And I won't take the time to read this, I'll just kind of make a couple quick comments about it. It looks like the church at Corinth had some members who were taking one another to court over legal disputes. And Paul shames them. He's like, are you kidding me? Don't you have some wise men among you who could settle these things among yourselves? And that's sort of hearkening back to the old law. Like, let's settle our matters within the church. We don't need external bodies to get in the middle of our business. And believe it or not, this has happened in the past. I have heard of situations, actually, I know of a congregation who, over 100 years ago, ended up, there was a split, and they ended up having to go to court to decide who got the building. And they couldn't get anyone to come in and help them make that decision. So, anyways, this is sort of the same spirit as we see taught in the old law. Take care of matters. Yeah, go ahead, Darrell.
Yeah, I found a letter in our records where an elder from here was went and spoke on the behalf of some other brethren in another congregation where there was I don't know that there was a feud, but there was some issues.
Yeah.
And so he went and wrote a letter that, in his speech, that he was representing them, and it was really a reconciliation. It brought in a third party. So.
Yeah, that's happened. It doesn't happen very often, but every once in a while, when a congregation has some internal turmoil, an evangelist will get called in to settle matters. Usually, that happens when you have an elder who is causing trouble. That's usually what happens, but it hasn't happened in quite a long time. I'm guessing almost 30 years that I'm aware of, at least. All right, Ruth chapter 4 is pretty straightforward. Boaz is ready to settle this objection before the elders at the gate of Bethlehem, and he approaches the man who's got this prior claim on Ruth. He asks the man, "Do you want Elimelech's land?" And the guy said, "Oh yeah, I'd like that." Well, here's the catch. Great negotiation tactic, right? So he said, "Well, if you want the land, there's a little bit of a catch here. You've got to marry Ruth." And the guy's like, "Well, I can't marry Ruth, so it's all yours." And this is how Boaz manages to secure Ruth's hand. So he's blessed by the elders and the witnesses, and this brings Naomi much joy. And they have a son together. His name is Obed. And Naomi, the women say to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him." So, a beautiful ending to the story. Naomi ends up having the child that she so desperately wanted. Any questions or comments as we close?
Just scratch.
All right. Very good. Good to see you all tonight. Looking forward to the break in the weather tomorrow. We'll close there, and I need to ring the bell here so we can get the boys back in here. Thanks, Logan, for coming to my rescue tonight. Really appreciate it. I love the story of Ruth. It's such a good story. It's a good one. And let's see, next week, do we get into Samuel? Is that right? Yeah. I'm just basically working the week of right now. I don't usually look ahead. All right. There's Mr. Boone, Mr. Johnsy.
Checked the internet, and they said a measure was equal to roughly a dry quart.
An ephah?
No, a measure.
Oh, that's what it is in
It's a
the
dry
King
quart.
James?
Yeah.
Okay. Uh-huh. What's a dry quart?
A quart is actually a measure of volume.
Okay.
It's just a dry quart. It's
Oh,
a,
okay.
It's a measure of volume filled with
A quart of grain.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, the New King James says an ephah, which I think is quite a bit larger than that.
that's kind of what I gathered from looking at all the comparisons. And I think you're right. I think 6 ephahs, she'd be a little hard pressed to be able to haul that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is it morning already? Well, we'll take a moment to extend the gospel invitation. If there's anyone we can help in any way, please tell us how as we stand and sing number 361.
Sing all 4 verses. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. They're all expecting me, and that's one thing I know. My Savior parted me, and now I onward go. I know He'll take me through, though I am weak and poor, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friends like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. I have a loving Savior up in glory land. I don't expect to stop until I'm with Him stand. He's waiting now for me in heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Just up in glory land we'll live eternally. The saints on every hand are shouting victory. Then saw the sweetest praise drift back from heaven's shore. And I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Thank you, Wade, for that lesson.